I drugged my ex during a family dinner and seduced him to get pregnant and rebuild our family because he let me stay yet started dating another woman. Now I face his fury and my daughter's silence. I don't know exactly when things started to break. I guess you never realize until everything is so damaged that it can no longer be fixed. I'm 35 years old, I have 2 daughters and a life that seems like a puzzle with missing pieces. It wasn't always like this. Of course, there was a time when I believed in love, in family, in forever. I was 19 when I met Julian. He was the typical guy, calm, mature for his age, with that confident look that makes you feel protected. I was in college full of dreams, and he was already working. Everything with him seemed right, stable, orderly, predictable. He made me feel like I had the world under control, and I loved that because I have always been one of intense emotions, of doing things without thinking too much. When I got pregnant with our daughter Laura, many said I was ruining my life, but for me it was the opposite. I thought that with her our love would grow stronger. We had a civil marriage and rented a small apartment. We didn't have much, but we were together and that was enough, or at least that's what I believed. The first years were good. Julian worked all day, and I took care of Laura. Then I started to feel lonely, not for lack of love, but because I felt my life had become a routine without air. I had a lifelong friend, Andres, with whom I had always talked. We had known each other since we were teenagers, and although Julian never said it openly, I knew he didn't like him. "That guy doesn't look at you like a friend," he would tell me. I would reply that it was his insecurity, that he couldn't expect me to cut ties just because he was a man. It was absurd. Sometimes I wonder if it all started there, with that insistence of mine, to prove that I could have friends, that I could be independent. Years later, when I think about it, I understand that I wasn't doing it out of rebellion, but out of a need to feel alive. We tried to save the marriage, we even went to therapy, but nothing really changed. Julian remained distant, more and more absorbed in his work, and I continued to feel invisible. There was no cheating, there was no big fight, we simply grew cold. It hurt me, but at that moment I thought it was for the best. We divorced when Laura was 8. He left with just what he needed, without drama, and we remained on good terms. Oh, so I thought. During the first months after the divorce, I dedicated myself to my daughter, working part-time, keeping up appearances. Andres came back into my life around that time. I was 27 and he had always been there waiting. I didn't fall in love suddenly. It was more like a relief, a pause in the midst of so much emptiness. He made me laugh. He made me feel desired again. In time we moved in together. We never married, but we built something like a family. For years passed like that, between ups and downs, small routines, and a new daughter, Sarah, who arrived like a blessing. I'm not going to lie, it wasn't perfect. Sometimes we argued, sometimes I wondered if I really loved him or if I just needed someone to fill the space Julian left. But at least I had a home, a stable life, and I thought that was enough. Until one day, everything fell apart. I remember that day with such clarity that it still gives me a knot in my stomach. Andres was taking a shower. His cell phone was vibrating on the table and on impulse I picked it up. I don't usually check phones, I swear, but something told me I should. It was a message. A woman was calling him darling. In that instant something in me broke. I felt the pulse in my temples, my throat closing up. I opened the conversation. Messages, photos, phrases that were so familiar to me, so similar to the ones he said to me. I stood frozen reading and reading. It had all been going on for weeks, maybe months. When he came out of the bathroom, with the towel around his waist and his usual smile, I showed him the screen. I didn't say anything at first, I just looked at him. He frowned, asked, "What's that?" And when he realized what he was seeing, he snatched the phone from my hands. "It's not what you think," he said. "Oh no. So, what is it, a cousin who calls you darling?" I yelled at him. We argued for hours. First he denied it, then he tried to justify himself, then he got angry. He told me I was always looking for excuses to fight, that I was obsessed with the past, that I had never gotten over Julian. I was speechless. It hurt because he was partly right. I talked about my ex more than I should, but that didn't give him the right to cheat on me. When I pressed him, he finally exploded. Yes, he shouted. Yes, I cheated on you. But it wasn't just that, you know? It's just that you're not the same anymore. Since we had Sarah, everything changed. You became cold, distant, you stopped seeing me. His words stuck in me like knives. He told me he felt trapped, that the other woman made him feel alive, that it hadn't been the same for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't even scream. I just felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to break. I got dressed, took my daughter, and left the house without looking back. That was the last night I slept with Andres, the last time I had a family before starting over from scratch again. From then on, my life became a series of desperate decisions, because it's one thing to lose love and quite another to lose stability, a roof, security. And that's how it all started. That's how my life began to fall apart once more because of a cheating man. After discovering Andres's infidelity, I felt as if the ground opened up under my feet. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the accumulated fatigue, the feeling of having lost everything again. I no longer had the strength to start over. I gathered some things, Sarah's clothes, the most important papers, and left without looking back. I didn't want to give him the pleasure of seeing me beg, of making a scene. If I had learned anything from my divorce with Julian, it was that begging changes nothing. For the first few days I stayed at a friend's house, but I soon felt like I was a burden. Sarah cried a lot at night. I didn't sleep, and every morning I woke up with my head full of thoughts that hurt. Andres wrote to me 2 or 3 times at first, asking for forgiveness, saying he was confused, but it no longer affected me in the same way. I hated him, yes, but more than anything I hated myself for having repeated history, giving everything and being left empty. The following months were hard, very hard. I got a part-time job in a clothing store, but the salary was barely enough for rent and food. Sarah was still little and needed diapers, milk, medicine. All of that costs more than a single mother can imagine. Luckily, I had the child support that Julian sent me for Laura, although it wasn't much. However, when the bills started to pile up, I realized that even with it I couldn't make it to the end of the month. Sometimes I would spend hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had taken so many turns. I was 35 and felt like I had aged twice as much. I wasn't afraid to work, but I was scared of the constant fatigue, that feeling that every effort only served to survive a little longer, not to live better. Laura, my eldest daughter, was starting to spend more time with her father, and I didn't blame her. At his house she had everything, her room, stability, a routine. At mine there was stress, debt, and an exhausted mother who was falling apart in silence. It hurt me, but it also gave me a little relief to know that at least someone could give her what I could no longer offer. One day, after a night when Sarah had a fever and I didn't even have enough money to buy her syrup, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I cried. I cried like I hadn't in years. And through tears I thought of Julian, not as a man, but as someone who had always been there, even if from a distance. He was stable, had a good job, and most importantly, he was my eldest daughter's father. Maybe, I told myself, he could help me for a while, just until I got on my feet. I spoke to Laura first. I told her that things were difficult, that I was thinking of asking her dad if he could help me a little, maybe with a temporary place to stay. I didn't want to put her in the middle, but I needed her to understand me, not to think badly of me. She looked at me in silence with those mature eyes that sometimes scare me and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'll talk to him, but promise me you won't fight." I promised myself we wouldn't. A week later, I showed up at Julian's house. He opened the door with a mixture of surprise and distrust. "What are you doing here?" was the first thing he said. I swallowed, trying to stay calm. "I need to talk to you," I replied. He sighed, looked inside, and let me in. The silence was awkward. The house smelled the same as before, of fresh coffee and detergent. Everything was so clean, so tidy, that I felt out of place. "What is it?" he finally asked. "I just wanted to know if you could help me," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Help you how?" he insisted. "With a place to stay," I muttered. "I'm about to lose the apartment and things aren't going well." He looked at me coldly. "That's your problem, not mine." I felt the blow, but before I could respond, Laura appeared coming down the stairs. I didn't know she was there. "Dad," she said, "don't be so hard. Mom's having a tough time. It wouldn't hurt you to let her stay for a while." Julian looked at me, then at our daughter. I remained silent, clenching my fingers on my purse. He sighed again, ran a hand through his hair and said, "Fine, but only for a while." "I don't want trouble." "Thank you," I whispered, on the verge of tears. That night I slept in the guest room with Sarah by my side. It wasn't much, but I felt safe. Julian explained that I could stay while I looked for a job or found something more stable. He said he didn't want conflict, that he was doing it for Laura. I understood. I wasn't going to demand anything more. The first few days were weird. I walked carefully around the house as if I were an intruder. But little by little I started to feel useful. I cooked, cleaned, did the laundry. Julian noticed and offered to pay me for helping with the housework. It was more than I was earning before, and I could also be close to my daughters. It seemed like a fair deal. Over time, the tension dissipated. Julian and I barely spoke, but we shared small moments, breakfast, some short chat about Laura, or trivial comments about the day. Nothing deep. However, I felt something moving in me again, something I thought was dead. He looked so different, more confident, more mature, more complete. And although I wouldn't admit it, I liked seeing him like that. Part of me wanted to think that there was still a chance, that life was giving us a second chance disguised as necessity. Of course, I didn't tell him. Not yet. Not when he had just opened the door for me again, but inside I knew. I didn't just want to be safe, I wanted to get back what was once mine. For now, I just kept telling myself it was temporary. Just for a while, just until I could start over. Just temporarily. Living under the same roof with Julian again was at first like walking on glass. Everything reminded me of a life that was no longer mine. The photos on the walls, the scent of his cologne, even the sounds of the house, the coffee maker, the slam of the bathroom door, the television on in the background, brought me an almost unbearable nostalgia. But at the same time they gave me a calm I hadn't felt in years. I'm not going to lie. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was only there out of necessity, that this was something temporary, a kind of refuge until I could get back on my feet. But the days passed, and every little routine made me feel part of something. The mornings were simple. I would prepare breakfast, get the girls up, get their clothes ready, and leave Julian's coffee ready before he left for work. At first, he didn't say anything. Sometimes he didn't even taste what I cooked. He just took his thermos, gave me a dry thanks, and left. But over time I began to notice small cracks in his indifference. One day he asked me to do his shirts because the laundry was closed. Another day he asked me to prepare his lunch if it wasn't too much trouble. And one Friday, he even brought me a package with my name on it, a box of makeup from one of those brands I could never afford to buy for myself, saying he had been given it as a promotion at work. It wasn't true. I knew it. But I pretended to believe him, and for the first time in a long time I felt seen. Julian had changed. He was no longer the man I remembered. He seemed more confident with that coldness that only time and stability can give. He had prospered. He had a better position, a new car, and even spoke more calmly, as if nothing bothered him. And I just watched him, feeling that time had been more generous to him than to me. There was something cruel in that, seeing him so well, so fulfilled, while I was still picking up the pieces of my life, but also something hopeful, because if he had been able to change, why couldn't we do it together? As the days went by, I started to feel more comfortable. I took care of the house, the girls, and even the little details I knew he valued. He offered to pay me for the housework, and I accepted. It wasn't charity, I told myself. It was a fair exchange. The money allowed me to save, buy new clothes for Sarah, treat myself occasionally. I started to feel useful, necessary, alive again. And most importantly, I had a shared routine with him again, even if it was minimal. We ate breakfast at the same table, shared silences, and sometimes, very few times, a laugh. It was strange. Everything between us was still measured, but it was no longer hostile. Laura, my eldest daughter, seemed happy to see us like this. Sometimes she would look at us with that illusion that only children have when they believe that love can fix everything. She didn't say much, but I could see the hope in her eyes, the same hope I was beginning to nurture in silence. But like everything in my life, the calm was short-lived. One night, while I was folding laundry in the guest room, I heard his voice on the phone. He was in the hallway talking in a low tone, with that softness one only uses with someone special. He said a name, Claudia. I stood still holding my breath. I heard how he laughed, how he said, "I'll call you when I get there." I felt a hole in my chest, a mixture of jealousy and rage. When he hung up and passed by the door, I pretended I hadn't heard him, but inside I was boiling. I barely slept that night. I kept telling myself that I had no right to feel this way, that I was no longer his wife, but I also thought that I had been his woman, the mother of his daughter, the one who had been there when he had nothing. And now he had another one. Another one who was benefiting from everything we had built together. It was unfair, terribly unfair. The following days I watched him more closely. He came home later, he dressed up more, he wore a different cologne, everything fit. He was dating someone. He didn't admit it, but I knew it. And every time I saw him check his phone with that smile that used to be mine, something inside me churned. It wasn't just jealousy, it was an absurd sense of loss, as if something that still belonged to me had been stolen. I tried to maintain my composure, to feign indifference, but when you're in the same house all day sharing silences, looks and memories, it's impossible not to look for signs, not to try to read between the lines. One Sunday, while we were having breakfast, I couldn't hold back. "Are you dating someone?" I asked without looking up from my plate. He took a few seconds to answer. "It's none of your business," he said in a firm tone. "I'm just asking out of curiosity." I tried to sound casual, but my voice was trembling. "Do me a favor," he said. "Don't start. Don't drag me into your dramas." I was speechless. I felt the heat rise to my face, my hands go cold. Laura was at the table too, so I didn't want to continue, but inside me the decision was already made. I wasn't going to give up. Not after everything we had been through, not when I was so close. That same afternoon, while I was playing with Sarah, I began to plan. Not something impulsive, not a fit of anger, but a way to remember what we were. A family dinner like the old days. A quiet evening, without arguments, just us and our daughters. Something that would make Julian remember that we were still a family. I asked Laura for help. I told her I wanted to make a dinner like when she was little. She smiled nostalgically and agreed to convince her father. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I felt that dinner would be the beginning of something, the perfect moment to get closer again, to make him see that there was still love between us, that what we had wasn't dead. We just needed a chance, one night, to reconnect. The idea of the dinner wasn't something impulsive. It wasn't a crazy idea born of pain or a last-minute whim. It was a carefully thought-out plan, with a clear intention, to recover something that was once mine, or at least to remember what it felt like to have it. If I was going to rebuild my life, if I really wanted to give my daughters a united family, I had to start there, with a shared table, with forced laughs, with that false normality that can do so much good when the soul is broken. I spent days planning everything. I made a list of Julian's favorite dishes. I chose the dinnerware he always used for celebrations. I even ironed the tablecloth we used to cover the table on Laura's birthdays. I made sure everything was perfect, because I couldn't fail that night. I wouldn't allow it. Laura was an important part of this. I asked her to talk to her father, to convince him to come home early that day. It wasn't much to ask, just a dinner like the old days. She agreed, although something in her eyes told me she suspected there was more to it. Still, she didn't ask, perhaps because she also needed, even for one night, to feel that everything could be okay. The day came. I cooked all afternoon, leaving the house impeccable, with dim candles and soft music in the living room. I wanted it to feel like a memory returning. Julian arrived on time. Perhaps out of obligation, perhaps out of habit. He greeted me with a dry kiss on the cheek and sat at the head of the table where he always sat. Laura in front of him, Sarah in her high chair, me at the side smiling more than necessary. We talked about trivial things. Laura's school, Julian's work, Sarah's new tooth. Nothing deep, but there was something different in the atmosphere. A tension hung in the air, subtle, barely perceptible, as if we all knew that this dinner was not just a dinner. When it was time for the toast, I brought a bottle of red wine I had saved for special occasions. I poured 2 glasses. Laura doesn't drink. I gave her an orange juice and smiled at her as if it were all part of a happy memory. What he didn't know is that I had put a sleeping pill in his glass so I could execute my plan. Julian took a sip, thanked me for the food, and said he felt a bit tired. "I must have had a longer day than I thought," he commented. "Go rest. I'll take care of everything," I told him in a soft voice. He got up, kissed Laura's forehead, and went upstairs. I cleared the plates, took Sarah to her crib, and returned to the table. I sat in front of Julian's half-empty glass, watched it for a moment, and then turned off the dining room lights. What happened next is hard to explain, not because I don't remember it, but because sometimes memories disguise themselves so they don't hurt so much. I went upstairs in silence. I knocked on the bedroom door. There was no answer. I entered slowly, like someone returning to a sacred place, and approached the bed. He was sleeping. His breathing was deep, calm. I watched him for minutes, feeling a mixture of guilt, desire, and need. I sat next to him. I didn't wake him up. I assumed the sleeping pill had already taken effect. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I crossed a line, but in my head at that moment, I didn't see it as something dark. I saw it as a symbolic act, as a way of remembering what we were, as a desperate attempt to make some of all that make sense again. So I did it with him while he was asleep as one last desperate plan to be able to have a child with him, so we could stay together after that. I don't remember much else. I fell asleep next to him, like in the old days, convinced that we had shared something that he had felt too. The next morning his voice woke me up. "What are you doing in my bed?" he asked, his face pale. "You and I were together last night," I replied, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about? You don't remember, do you? You were tired. You went up to sleep and then we talked. It was all very nice." He got up abruptly, got dressed without looking at me, and told me to get out. He yelled at me that I was crazy, that he didn't know what I was talking about, that I should stop making things up. I reminded him of the dinner, the wine, the atmosphere, but he denied everything as if it were a nightmare. He gave me a week to leave the house. He said I had crossed all the lines, that it was no longer his responsibility, that my stay had been only for our daughter, and that was over. But I didn't give up. Not after everything I had done, not after feeling that something had been ignited that night, even if he denied it. I begged him to listen to me. I reminded him of Laura. I told him we could still rebuild our lives, that even if he didn't remember, that didn't change what we had shared, that he didn't have to love me yet, that we just needed time. He called me selfish. He said I was playing with our daughter's innocence, that I was ruining everything for a fantasy. He kicked me out of his room, gathered my things, and left them by the door. Laura heard the argument. She asked her father why he was kicking me out. He didn't answer, he just said that things were more complicated than they seemed. I looked at her and whispered that everything was going to be fine, that it didn't matter if they kicked me out this time, because I was going to come back. I left that house with my head held high, but with my soul dragging behind me. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry in front of Laura. I just packed the little I had and walked out that door as if I were the one who had decided to leave, but inside I was broken. A part of me was still convinced that what had happened that night with Julian was real, that even though he didn't remember it, something had brought us back together, something stronger than resentment or past mistakes. And that idea grew like a silent seed. Day after day, with every little symptom, with every strange sensation in my body. I didn't need a test to know it. I felt it, I knew it. I was pregnant. 2 weeks later, I took a home test. Positive. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat on the bed with the test in my hand looking at the ceiling. I thought about Sarah, about Laura, about myself, and then about him, about how I would give him the news. I had to tell him, not out of obligation, but because he deserved to know, because this child, unlike everything else, could change everything. I went to his house on a Monday afternoon. I knocked on the door as if I were a stranger. Julian opened it, and his expression was a mixture of surprise, discomfort, and resignation. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I have to tell you something," I said without beating around the bush. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was so brutal that for a second I thought he hadn't heard me right. Mine, he finally said, as if the words burned his tongue. Yes, no, it can't be, he denied, shaking his head and taking a step back. You're lying. Are you crazy? His reaction hurt me more than I wanted to admit. I'm not lying. You know it, I replied. Of course you're lying. What? You got with someone else now and you come to pin it on me. I hated him for saying that, for thinking that, for being so distrustful. We argued with shouting, with accusations. I asked him to accompany me to a clinic, to do the test together, to at least deign to face the truth. And he went. We didn't talk during the wait. He wouldn't look at me. I just kept my eyes fixed on the floor with my hands clasped in my lap. The confirmation came in a few minutes. I was pregnant. The weeks matched up, but he, still skeptical, demanded a paternity test. Really? I asked him. After all this, you still doubt it? He didn't answer, he just made the appointment for the test. I agreed. I had nothing to hide. A week later, I went to his house with the sealed envelope. He opened it with the same coldness as before. I handed it to him without a word. He opened it. He read it, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the color drain from his face. It's yours, I said softly. We knew it. We felt it. No, he muttered. It can't be. It was that night, Julian. The dinner when you and I were together. This is what's left of us. He sat down in silence. He didn't ask for more explanations. He didn't insult me, he just sat there. As if everything was crashing down on him. And then, like an unwitting angel, Laura entered the room. What's wrong? She asked, noticing the atmosphere. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke down in front of her. Your dad is being unfair, I told her. I'm pregnant with his child and he still won't accept reality. She looked at him. Is it true, Dad? He didn't answer immediately, but Laura insisted and then he exploded. Yes, he shouted, but it wasn't how you think. That was crazy. What are you saying? Laura asked, confused. That night, he said, pointing at me, she drugged me. She served me that perfect dinner with her fake smiles and her good intentions. She waited for me to fall asleep and snuck into my room without permission. I wanted to interrupt, to deny it, to explain it differently, but he wouldn't let me speak anymore. This pregnancy is not a miracle. It's a manipulation. I didn't want it. She decided for both of us and now she comes demanding I take responsibility. Laura looked at me. I will never forget her expression. Is it true? She asked me. It wasn't like that, I tried to say. It was a dinner for the family. Things just happened. He was conscious. He was tired, I murmured. But it wasn't what he says. I didn't force him to do anything. The silence was worse than any scream. Laura went to her room without saying anything else. Julian asked me to leave. He didn't shout. He wasn't angry. He just picked up my things, put them by the door, and waited. You don't have that child anymore, he said. I don't have to tolerate you in my house anymore. We still have a daughter, I shouted. We can raise her as if she were yours. No, he roared. I only have one daughter, and I'm not going to carry your mistakes or your manipulations. He kicked me out, this time with no possibility of returning. I left, shattered, but still convinced that all of this had been for love. I returned to the small room I had gotten after leaving. I went back to working part-time with Sarah by my side. I tried to stay on my feet, to save, to resist. All my effort, my plan, my hope were now useless. Because 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night, something happened. A sharp pain, a hemorrhage. I rushed to the hospital. The doctor was direct. I had lost it. I couldn't believe it. That child, that hope, that union I had waited for so long, was gone, and with it everything I had left. When Julian arrived at the hospital, he looked at me not knowing what to say. I lost it, I whispered through tears. It was an accident. I was fine, I swear. It just happened. He looked down. Go rest, he told me. I'll clean everything up. And for a moment I thought he would stay. That he would take care of me. That maybe he finally understood what we had lost. But no, a week later, while we were having dinner, he did it again. When are you leaving the house? He asked. What? I replied, not understanding. You're not pregnant anymore. There's no reason for you to stay. Laura tried to defend me. I shouted. He exploded, and there, in front of everyone, he revealed his truth. He told what he claimed had happened that night. He said it without filters, with anger, as if he needed to get it out from the depths of his soul. Laura went to her room crying. I told him he was sick, that he was exaggerating, that he didn't understand. He, without saying anything else, grabbed my things, threw them into the hallway, and closed the door in my face. People on the street looked at me as I cried, hugging a broken backpack, carrying a child who was not to blame for anything. And although everything told me I should give up, I still thought that one day I could go back, but it was too late. I had already lost everything, even the one who never arrived, because of a spontaneous abortion. Sometimes I wonder at what point I became the villain of my own story. Everyone seems to have their version. Julian, Laura, even the neighbors who now look at me sideways as if they know every detail. But no one stops to think about what led me here. No one asks why a woman reaches the point of doing what I did. They just point at me, judge me, single me out as if my pain were a spectacle. After losing the baby, everything collapsed again. I went back to that small, damp apartment with walls that seemed to cry with me. Sarah slept on my chest, and I spent sleepless nights imagining how everything would have been if Julian had reacted differently. If he had listened to me, yes, if just for a second he had tried to understand instead of condemning, but no. All he did was kick me out, expose me in front of our daughter, and erase everything we ever were. He says that what happened that night was a betrayal, a madness, an abuse. But how can he call it that if it was the result of the most sincere love a person can feel? Yes, my decisions may not have been the right ones, but they were not ill-intentioned. I just wanted to repair what had been broken, to bring back the family he decided to abandon. And yet, he turned me into the monster of his story. I don't deny that I planned it. I don't deny that I did everything I could to get close to him. But it wasn't out of malice. It was because I loved him, because I couldn't stand to see him give what was ours to another woman, because I knew that deep down he also missed what we had. He just needed a push, a spark to remember. And although for a moment I thought I had succeeded, when he allowed me back into his house, when he spoke to me without coldness, when he took care of me after the hospital, everything ended as always, with him closing doors and letting me bear the consequences alone. He says he helped me out of pity, but the truth is I helped him long before he had anything. I was by his side when he had no money, when he was frustrated with his job, when he cried because he didn't know if he could give our daughter a decent future, and this is how he repays me. Kicking me out onto the street, slandering me in front of my own daughter, destroying what little dignity I had left. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it. Laura doesn't talk to me anymore. Sometimes I write to her, but she doesn't answer. I know Julian filled her head with lies, telling her only his version. And of course, coming from him, everything sounds more believable. He was always good with words. He knows how to seem like the victim, how to get others on his side. I, on the other hand, only have my voice and no one listens to it anymore without judging me. I don't consider myself a bad mother or a bad woman, just someone who made desperate decisions in moments of loneliness. When you are alone for so long, when life rips away what you love over and over again, you do things you can't explain, things that even you don't fully understand. It was a mistake, maybe, but it was mine, and I won't let them take it from me or make me feel like I'm a monster. Julian, if you ever read this, I want you to know something. I didn't do anything with the intention of hurting you. What I did was for love, for our daughter, for what we were, for what we could have been. You were the one who pushed me to the edge with your silences, your rejections, your coldness. If you had given me a little hope, a kind word, maybe everything would have been different. But no, you chose to ignore me, to make me feel invisible until I exploded. And now, look at me. I'm here writing from a windowless room, with a heart full of regrets that I don't know if they belong to me or if they were imposed on me. Everyone talks about what I did, but no one talks about what was done to me. Because yes, I made mistakes, but so did he, only his are easier to hide. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine that everything was different, that night, instead of running away from me, Julian hugged me, That Laura smiled seeing us together, that the baby was born healthy and strong, and that things finally fell into place. I like to think that somewhere, in another version of this story, that happened and that there I'm not the bad one, because I wasn't. I was just a broken woman, trying to assemble with the pieces of a past what the future snatched from me. If that makes me the villain, so be it, but at least let someone remember that before everything, all I wanted was love, and that in the end was what destroyed me. Comment 1. I can't believe you say it was for love. You drugged someone and took advantage of him while he was sleeping. That's not love, it's abuse. Opie replies, it wasn't abuse. He and I had history, feelings, a real connection. We just needed a push to remember what we were. Comment 2. Trying to get a relationship back using a sleeping pill and an unwanted pregnancy is the most twisted thing I've ever read. Do you need help? No, a second chance. Opie replies, I didn't do it out of malice. I was desperate. I just wanted to rebuild a family for my daughters. Give them something stable. Comment 3. Your ex is completely right to stay away. You manipulated him, you deceived him, and on top of that you played the victim. You are a dangerous person, Opie replies. I'm not dangerous, I just acted out of pain. He ignored me, he humiliated me and made me feel invisible. Nobody knows what it's like to reach that point. Comment 4. Did you really think that getting pregnant by him would make him love you again? That doesn't unite anyone, it just destroys more. Opie replies, I wasn't trying to force him. I wanted him to remember what we once had. A child was a symbol of hope, not a trap. Comment 5. Using your daughter to help you convince her father was cruel. You put her in the middle of a disaster that only you caused. Opie replies, maybe it was a mistake to involve her, but at that moment I thought a family dinner could heal wounds, not open more. Comment 6. The worst part isn't what you did, but how you keep justifying it. No love excuses drugging someone. Comment 7. Your story isn't sad, it's scary. You planned everything, you executed it, and now you say it was symbolic. That's the most disturbing part. Comment 8. You lost everyone because you crossed irreparable lines. You are not the victim, you are the one who destroyed your own family. Comment 9. If you felt lonely, you should have sought help or therapy. You don't rebuild love with deceit, you destroy what little is left. Comment 10. There's no way to sugarcoat it. What you did was sexual abuse, and on top of that you play the misunderstood one. The level of denial is incredible.